we were told that everything is on track. We are going to Zimbabwe.
We are really grateful that at last we're able to bring the remains of our loved ones back to their beloved country.
This is emotional for me, really. I'm trying to say more, but you know what? It's a painful process.
Coming here confirms the difficulties they had to face up with in arriving at the point where we can be able to be pointed to the graves of and the remains of our beloved.
We are so grateful for that. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity, you know what I mean? And it came at the right time, you know, it came at the right time because we are getting on with age as well.
As we march into the theater of war, we are required to clearly answer one question which determines the nature of our struggle. In whose interest should the state power be wielded? This is a rallying call, which can only be supplied by the battlefield. Our patience have run out. We must fight to restore the usurped land. Our sons and their sons will carry on the fight where we leave off until victory is won, until an Africanist socialist democracy is established in our land. It must be Africanist because nationalism demands that the interests of the indigenous people to whom the land belongs should dominate over those of aliens. It must be socialist because interests of the workers whose contributions to the wealth of the country is more significant should dominate those of their private employers. It must be democratic because state power will be wielded by the common people who form the majority of the people and whose interests are common and non-antagonistic.
President Ramaphosa has, I think in 2022, 2021, promised that he's going to bring back the remains of Basil February, the remains of Duma Nokwe, the Secretary General of the ANC, the youngest one. He's going to bring back the Muposho. And I just thought, like, why should we just bring three? The president has given the line of march. It has not happened. Let me make it happen. And I called the team. I said, we are going to do this.
My name is Vusithemba Ndima. I'm the Deputy Director General for Heritage Promotion and Preservation in the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture. This particular project becomes important in healing, in bringing about closure, because the neighboring countries, most of them, basically, the frontline states, the so-called frontline states, they were bombed and people died. So the freedom that we have here in South Africa was watered by the blood, not only of South Africans, but of our neighboring states. That's how important the contribution of our neighboring state was.
I don't think our freedom could have been attained without our neighboring countries. They've played a massive role in hosting our freedom fighters, in making sure that they keep them safe from the claws of the apartheid regime. But I also want to congratulate our freedom fighters, not only because they were fighting for our freedom, but for the discipline that they had while they were in other people's countries. They were staying in camps. There was rarely one that stepped out of line.
So many people had these gaping wounds for a very long time because they didn't know how their loved ones died, where they were laid to rest. But for them to see them coming back, despite the fact that they came back in coffins. But there was that closure. Too many.
My name is Madeleine Fullard. I'm the head of the Missing Persons Task Team in the National Prosecuting Authority of South Africa, which falls under the Department of Justice. And the Missing Persons Task Team was set up in terms of the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC, which specified that government must continue tracing the fate and whereabouts of people who disappeared in political circumstances between 1960 and 1994. And while we have largely worked inside the country, we also had a lot of cases outside South Africa's borders, plus the wider exile losses, people who died while in exile in that period. So we are now working together with other departments on the Exile Repatriation Project.
The Missing Persons Task Team, their role is to mainly has been to trace missing persons, missing because they're missing from their families, and also the fact that their graves were not known where they're buried.
Began our work as Missing Persons Task Team around 2005. We had a list of missing persons from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC, and included in that list were many exile cases or people who had gone into exile and they'd never been seen again. They may have died in exile, they might have come into the country operating underground and been killed or disappeared in those circumstances.
The new Minister of Arts and Culture, Mr. Gaten Mackenzie, instructed that project had to happen within his first 100 days in office.
As we began doing our work, more and more families came forward saying, our loved ones, our son, our brother, our sister left the country in this year and we've never seen them again. And that was really challenging because at the time we didn't really have a mandate to work internationally, outside the borders of the country. So there was very limited work we could do on the exile cases. But we began basically lobbying and saying, look, we think it's possible to recover the remains of those who died in exile. We won't recover everybody, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't recover.
We ended up bringing close to 40 of our veterans, and we are now experts in repatriation, and we're going to bring back more of our leaders.
Missing Persons Task Team, we're quite small. We are only 6 people at the moment, although we were once 8.
With this project, then due to their expertise of having done exhumations within the country and also having forensic anthropologists within their team that are specially trained to deal with skeletonized human remains and be able to do biological profiles, be able to sort of study the skeletal remains and establish the possible cause of death. So that's how the Missing Persons Task Team came to occupy quite a significant role within this technical task team.
We have a investigation wing and a forensic anthropology wing. So we have two forensic anthropologists, that's Claudia Bisso from Argentina and Dr. Kavita Laka, who is South African.
You see these people, Madeleine Fuller, I mean, they're just ordinary people. They're happy, they can relate with you. And you get amazed. What cures them? Because for me, I do not think that I will be able to just be normal.
At the moment, we've got 3 forensic investigators, and the one is Ambrose Ndlovu. The second is John Maelane, and they were both actually in exile themselves, and that really brings particular strengths to their understanding. They were also politically engaged in the country before going into exile, so they have both the richness of knowledge of the local and exile. So that's their particular strengths. And we also have Billy Motsileng, who is a little bit younger, and he was inside the country during the years of political protest and political repression. And so all of them have kind of unique insights, and that's really the strength that they bring to our team.
Working together with Sarah's Repatriation and Restitution Office and Sarah's communications team for documentation of those exhumations, documenting the graves prior and during the exhumation process, and any other activities that are related to the Exile Repatriation project.
I really have respect for colleagues in the missing person task team. Serious respect, because look, I was not part of exhumation. I went there, they were doing, I would go, but they were doing the actual work of exhumation.
The way the project has been conceived and outlined in the implementation plan is that we have 6 phases, and these phases will apply to each country that we work in.
With the phase of the project implementation, then we decided to focus on those 2 countries as we do the country-to-country approach. We began with the grave mapping phase, which was done in November 2023. And within that phase, we positively identified 35 graves in Zambia. In Zimbabwe, we identified 22 graves, and 2 of which had been exhumed, and 1 was of a Zimbabwean national who was caught up in a cross-border raid.
Phase 2 is then we visit the home country, and it's kind of a reconnaissance mission because we call it grave mapping, but it's essentially the process of going and establishing on the ground where as many graves as possible are. So once we've completed phase 2, which is the grave mapping, we can then actually move into excavation and exhumation, which is phase 3. And that is essentially what we've been doing here in this particular process in both Zambia and Zimbabwe, excavating and exhuming the remains of graves that we had previously mapped. Essentially, we have completed phase 3 for Zambia and Zimbabwe. Phase 4 is what we call forensic examination and confirmation of identity, because it is our duty as government to ensure that the families are given the correct remains. Because if we are working in a cemetery where there are records and where there's grave numbering, you can be pretty confident in your assessment. In certain cases, it might be necessary to do DNA testing to confirm the identity. And that is in fact what happened in Zambia. We felt that there were 6 cases where, because of the state of the cemetery and the lack of complete records, that it was a little speculative and that we needed to have DNA confirmation of identity. So these are all complexities and factors that go into why we have to have phase 4, which is forensic examination and confirmation of identity. Once that is complete, we move to phase 5, which is the handover of the remains to the families and reburial, and that probably will take place at a provincial or municipal level. Yeah. The final phase is what we call memorialization, and it's essentially answering the question, how do we remember those who were driven out of the country by political repression, who lost their citizenship? How do we reincorporate them as citizens? How do we remember them, and particularly remember their sacrifices? So we need to look at working with the host countries to look at ways of commemorating that shared history of those lives that were lost, and as well working with municipalities and provinces to look at ways of remembering those people who gave their lives in the struggle for freedom and democracy. So we had really a very ambitious program. When I think back now, I think we might have been a bit crazy to adopt such an ambitious launch for the Exile Repatriation Project, because it involved 2 countries, 4 towns, 7 burial sites, nearly 50 exhumations in the space of 3 weeks. And we brought the families with as well, in waves. So that was really quite a unique experience, and it meant that on arrival, we arrived on the 28th of August, and just a day or 2 later, we had the families of nearly 30 people arrive in Lusaka to visit the graves.
Going with families to Lusaka, just having conversations with them. And many of them at that particular point in time beginning to say, are these guys serious about this? Is this thing gonna happen? But when we got there, and of course with all the protocols that we had to try and we had to adapt to. Those who were in Zambia, some of you'll remember that we only got to the graves around 4 because we had to also observe some protocols in terms of traditional healing and the like. But when we got to the graves and the feeling that you could see how people went through some emotional transformation of some sort, when they said, "Ah, this is the grave of my brother. This is it. This is it." And some of them just breaking down and crying. And, I think that had I not been part of that journey, I would have been deprived of this experience.
Before the homecoming ceremony, we the dignity was number one. With the families, they went to the site, they went to where the grave was, and through their cultures, the different cultures, people have different cultures, the bodies were transported spiritually, which was spiritual burying. We did that.
The moment the families went to the graves, an enormously profound emotion, peace, pain, all emerged in that moment. And that was extremely moving, extremely moving. For many families, it was their first time to really know what had happened to the person, and to see where the grave was, where they had been lying all these years. There were a lot of tears. There was also joy and happiness at finally, their hopes of recovering the remains of their loved ones. It was actually happening.
My name is Bonke Mkondo. I'm representing the family of Johannes Daudau, our father, who left South Africa around 1963.
My name is Josephine Mpele from Soweto, Orlando West. The reason for my visit here was to take back home the remains of my uncle being Thabo Gudova Mpele and her daughter Masechaba Mpele.
The uncertainty that you will reach this conclusion. The family had heard about his passing. Information did reach. However, conditions were not so favorable that we could attend the way we would have, just like the many other families. Economic situations were not favorable. The political setting was not favorable. And also, fathers in their nature become a glue of the whole family. There tends to be disintegration when they are not at the steering wheel, if I can say it. And many things get lost. Albeit we honor Mateko, Tautau's wife, our mother, for her steady hand in bringing up so many children single-handedly to make them citizens of this country, albeit the obstacles that they had to face in the absence of the figurehead.
The experience for me to come here, it wasn't a pleasant one, because we had to relive everything that happened to him, and it's a painful process, because honestly, his mother wanted him to back into the country at that time, but she couldn't, because at that time it was still apartheid and all that. So he couldn't bury him back home. So I'm here to take him back home.
the privilege that one has had to lead the delegation first to Lusaka, meeting with the officials there, government officials, and explaining our mission, but also even before explaining our mission, just thanking them, and thanking the entire nation for what they did for us. And also our intentions there to repatriate. And of course, there are rules and regulations that are followed there. We had to also request that they assist us in ensuring that we meet the deadlines. They did whatever it took to ensure that they followed all the processes, to allow us to start working on the graves. Our team, the missing person task team from the Department of Justice, from the NPA. It was amazing.
We did ultimately persist, and we were able to start exhumations in early September in Lusaka. And it was hard and heavy work. It was hot, extremely hot. We needed an enormous number of grave diggers and workers to work with us. And it's always a challenge to build up a kind of a relationship and an understanding with those grave diggers, like how deep to go, how we work, and so on. But once you get into the rhythm of it, then it goes quite smoothly. And that's pretty much what happened. And there were some really profound moments in that. I think for me, one of the moments that stands out was seeing this flash of yellow and green around the neck of the remains of Duma Nokwe, the former Secretary General of the ANC, and realizing that it was actually a scarf, an ANC scarf that had been around his neck for over 40 years. We proceeded. I think we worked for 4 days, and we managed to recover almost everybody that we were looking for. We did experience, as I mentioned, 2 graves that had particular challenges, and then there were 6 individuals that we felt required DNA tests before going home. So those 6 will remain in Zambia until the DNA tests are complete. And we then moved to Livingstone. And that was particularly meaningful for us as a team because we have worked on that case for very many years. And that is the case of 7 MK cadres who were killed on the 13th of September 1988. They were crossing the Zambezi River in a dinghy, and the dinghy was attacked by a hippo. And the dinghy overturned, and 7 of the 8 drowned. We were really elated that we were able to find those graves, and the families were able to visit and to see the Zambezi River where they had drowned. It was profoundly moving and meaningful. Fortunately, in Harare, we were blessed with excellent cemetery records and a very organized cemetery, the Warren Hill Cemetery. And all the graves had tombstones, and you could read from the structure of the cemetery that it was really a highly organized. And when we were confident we would be able to recover all of the 15 people we were looking for there. And we did.
But when we also went to Bulawayo, that team drove all the way from Harare to Bulawayo to work with the South African team there. You can just see there the passion. You can see the commitment that was there. And it was not questionable at all. And the support that we got there was amazing from both countries, I must say.
In Bulawayo, we were looking particularly at the casualties of the the ANC's 1967 Wankie campaign. And from previous research, we had been able to establish that at least 3 of the cadres who were killed in the Wankie campaign were buried in Bulawayo cemeteries. So we found remains that were consistent with Basil February in terms of age, a very young man, age 23 or 24 when he was killed. During the exhumation, we actually found a little plastic label, which had obviously been put on top of the coffin, which said Paul Peterson. So there was just no doubt then. Not only did he appear as Paul Peterson in the records with the correct date of death and burial, but his name was right there in the coffin. I had actually worked with his brother, Terry, February at the TRC. So we knew each other personally, and it was really a great dream of mine to be able to recover the remains of Basil February, and I'm really over the moon that we succeeded.
The Department of Sport, Arts and Culture played a massive role. The NPA tracing unit played a massive role. All the departments, this was not Mackenzie doing this, Minister Mackenzie, this was teamwork. And that just shows you when we work together, how much more can we achieve.
First and foremost, our entity, Sarah, was very pivotal, as I've said before, because you were an engine that ensured that administratively, we gave over the administration of this project to you.
In recent years, we argued for a more collective approach, one that said, look, instead of spending, a lot of money to recover one individual, let's look at recovering many from a country at one time. And that would be a much more cost-effective and a much more fair way of doing the repatriations.
It must have taken painstaking work. It must have taken a lot of dedication and time to coordinate and find GPSs in old, very old graves, and in the midst of that, find our beloved. They kept us all the while informed about what was going on, and we all those who did this work. It is a godly work. It is a noble work. May the department and the government, who endured everything to bring us to this point, be thanked heartily from the depths of our heart. And I believe I'm speaking for the many whoever I've interacted with during this trip, who expressed this feeling, a tragic comedy. Tears were shed by the gravesides, rituals were performed by the gravesides, and prayers were made. We think God has noted it, and He will open a different door for us to chart. But the future we shall walk with dignity. The future we shall walk with confidence and still have trust in the humanity of others and share the experience with the rest of whom we do. Of the many things to us that the government has done, good things that they have done, this to us is a crowning act.
the event at Freedom Park was really a culmination and a powerful event. Remember that we had a number in mind of who was going to be there. But I can tell you we oversubscribed.
The president was the keynote speaker, as it should be. The families all, it was a full circle moment for many of us.
I remember the day before, I was working closely with one colleague in the president, Mr. Mahlasela. Suddenly, they got a call that former President Mbeki is coming. And I was like, hey, how are we going to manage this? And he says, I remember what he said to me. He said, no, don't worry. You are seeing this as a problem. This is a good problem for us. The fact that you have got the former head of state coming here for us is very good. And it just twisted my mind because I was like saying, oh, how are we going to manage, this and that, But I think that we're oversubscribed because people saw the value of this, saw the importance of the homecoming ceremony. And I think that it happened with dignity.
Our collective strengths working together under the leadership of DSAC has really proved to be a powerful tool in making sure this project is a success.
When you take it to the communities, it becomes more emotional, more intense, because this is the person they knew. This was the commander. This was the person that they ran away together from the cops. These are the people that they have memories of. And now some were just happy that they managed to bury them before they died. And that was even more emotional. Because there were stories told about this person, which didn't happen when we had it. But when they're home, it's like where I'm from, people can tell you stories that you might not know. And that's the same thing with our commanders that we took home. In the area, we're like, yeah, remember that day when I was with him? That day I should have gone to exile, and it just brings all of that.
As news of this campaign has filtered into the media, we're getting calls from families, Tanzania, Angola, Uganda, and so on. And so we need to begin phase 1, 2, and 3 for Angola, and so on, and move systematically through the countries. So we'll need to get the ball rolling for each of those countries, moving through the 6 phases that I had spoken about earlier. So this is really just the first step on a long journey.
We already have met, the entire team that was working on the repatriation, all the government departments. But of course, the people who have been leading in this drafting of the standard operating procedure is Missing Persons Task Team. They've done a draft. We've also done a 5-year plan. And of course, we know the complexities. But we will ensure that we do this in a phased approach. Let's move from the simple to the complex.
We will have successes, we will have failures. And I think as long as the families know that we are going to make the best possible efforts to locate the remains of their loved ones, and we can't really do more than that, than to promise that we will do our very best. Yeah.
I want to thank you. I want to thank Sarah, you know, as an entity. You said that the CEO passed her regard. And if you can indicate that I've said also thank you to her and thank you to the chairperson, to the board members of Sarah that were part of this decision to allow Sarah to play this role.
It has been the most important project I've worked on. When I'm in my rocking chair one day and I look back at my life and what good have I ever done, this will come to mind. And you say, is it a success? Of course. They are here. We are not saying we are still coming. They are here. They've arrived.